Hello, everyone, and welcome to Beacon Space's first lore stream here. I'm your host here, Lichmaster98. Whoop, that's the wrong screen. And are we gonna? There we go. Now we show up. All right. So you can see with me, I've got some co-host with me today. So co-host number one here, Lupus Calbrick. Go ahead and introduce yourself.
Hello, I am Lupus Galbraith.
And then also co-hosting with me today is Trace, or otherwise known as Deeds. Hi, Deeds.
Hi, everyone.
So we'll be running through a couple things today, and let me go ahead and get that list of things we're going to be doing today out of the way. So first off is we're going to be going through some faction announcements. Each of you got the chance to submit some things to us, and we'll be showing those off, talking about whatever you've asked us to. Some of you gave us faction introductions, some of us gave us some really wonderfully produced videos. So we'll be going through all of those here in the same order as we placed assets in Faction Turns Stream 0. And then after that, we'll be going through the results of the timeline polls that we just ran recently. So we'll figure out the history of Beacon Space from prehistory to our current day. And we'll be going through that to rolling some dice to figure out what year some of the events that past happened in, and then expand upon some of our thoughts about the ideas as well. So with that out of the way, let's go ahead and jump straight on in to faction announcements. And I believe our first announcement here comes from us from Children of the Vein. So I'm going to take that out of the way. We've got a video from them to play here along with some text content. So here it comes. So here we go. To foreigners, we are a contradiction, united and yet constantly in a state of civil war. Our home, Heliocytus, is divided into clans, or as we call them, veins, who continuously compete for power over more of the planet. This contradiction is even reflected in our government. The lower hemisphere is Logos, the leader of each vein, charged with the day-to-day life of Heliocytus. Often breaking out in fights, it is only our great armistice under the great tree's leaves that keeps this court from turning into a bloodbath. The upper hemisphere are chosen representatives called Pathos, and can handle anything from trade deals to war. They guard our people. In times of great crisis, however, both hemispheres will elect one person to lead us all. When selected, they will venture deep into the tunnels of Heliocytus, and if they emerge, will become the Ethos. Once the crisis is resolved, however, they go back into the tunnels to be rejoined with God. These contradictions only truly make sense to those born on Heliocytus. We believe in survival of the fittest, and that only in conflict will greatness arise. Failure is a greater gift than victory. It shows you where you are at your weakest, and the veins exercise this in a constant competition to approve themselves to become closer to God. Alongside faith, we uphold the sciences. These two elements, science and faith, are not separated as they might be in some cultures, but are inextricably interwoven. It is through science and the blood of God, a gift from the great tree sap, that we improve and evolve to become closer to God. But even as we pursue what appears to be a singular goal, every vein and individual's path to it are explicitly diverse and varied. Denominations of the faith often divide along these lines, and the veins are often united in some similar idea of faith, culture, and/or the path to join with God. This path isn't solely placed on the veins, but it is most focused on the individual and how their singularity of sapience affects theirs and others' paths. This faith is heavily interwoven with all aspects of their life. A ship captain may have their crew confide in them with doubts, and a foreman may elaborate on finer points of faith to their workers, part of their duties. Our God themselves is a mystery. The full image of their machinations are possibly unknowable to mortal minds. What we do know is that it, or part of it, is deep within Heliocytus' core, and the greatest representation of its majesty, the great tree, reaches towards the skies, a beacon to the lost. With its great gifts we have thrived, the sap of the great tree making the blood of God, allowing us to improve ourselves, only limited by our own ability to see God's light. With its fruit we craft beautiful creatures in God's image, capable of bringing God to all life. But even with these gifts, some of the children are cold. we give ourselves back to our god as thanks for their gift, and we are buried among the roots of the great tree. The most worthy, however, are allowed to die in an off-world ritual, their bodies feeding nurseries of our god, so that its benevolence may spread to all those who prosper. Because of this, many Vayans have also taken the sacred duty of spreading our god's sacred genes into other societies under the guise of medical tourism. And that is our faction announcement from Children of the Vein. Any thoughts, Cal, on the Veins introduction here?
They have a fantastic aesthetic coming together. Very creepy, lots of biotech. It's super interesting to see their lore develop as it has.
Yeah, I'm interested to see where it goes. This union of science and faith that they've got going definitely has a very interesting feel to it. And the artwork you were seeing on screen just a moment ago is created by one of their lovely community members, Basque Aurorix on Discord. Made some great, amazing art. It's all available in the channels on Discord if you want to go check it out there, and you need to see it again. But we'll want to make sure that they get an appropriate shout out for such an amazing bit of artwork that especially came out of the era back before the factions had all of their official names. So that takes care of Children of the Veins' initial announcement here from turn 1. It's a nice introduction to their faction and gives us an idea of what to expect from them in the near future as we continue to build up the world of Beacon Space. So our next faction to talk about here is Ascent, who is unveiling a more than likely logo today, as you can see now on the side of your screen. And hey, Cal, you want to go ahead and give us their announcement?
Yep, absolutely. Ascent have provided us with several different pieces of lore to share with you, but starting with a poem, Ascent has this to say. A common life is short, empty, doomed to oblivion. But a legacy written in the stars, that does not end. Reject the menial, hopeless existence, sedentary in delirium. Ascend. A poem by Ascent. Very distinctive. They've provided an overview of their faction as well. They say, Ascent is more than an organization. It is an ideal formed to combat the malaise of technological prosperity, dedicated to creating the perfect being, excelling in mind, body, and spirit. Ascent the organization is a technological meritocracy that measures and quantifies excellence in all matters including competitive sports, academic scholarship, and career excellence. It provides numbers based on individual performance that indicate each member's status in the organization. Every aspect of an Ascender's life is dedicated to raising their score. They will risk life and limb in deadly high-speed races, volunteer for dangerous expeditions into the unknown, or work 100-plus hour weeks, all so that they will make their individual mark on history. They believe the only real immortality that can be achieved is to be remembered by the living, and an easy long life without a lasting legacy is worse than death. It is nothingness. That very thematic faction organization got to ascend through the ranks.
It's a great introduction to their faction, and also their logo design here with the little, what I can only now I'm seeing as a small paper airplane, perhaps flying through, swishing past us, ascending. It's a great logo design too. Unfortunately, I don't believe I know the author of this, so if somebody would please let me know so that I can make sure you are appropriately credited in the description of this, I would appreciate that. And then I believe Ascent also submitted some information about the different assets that they have on the map. You want to talk us through what those assets are?
They have. They've provided a small blurb for each of their assets, starting with their tripwire cells, which are called the Koios Anacalypse Expeditionary Force. But apart from their name, all other information about their tripwire cells are currently redacted. Next up is their freighter contract, the ship Argo Where You Tell Me. It's an example of one of the many longer-range freighters employed in the Mercurial Postal Guild, and it's currently in port in Icaros, getting ready to set out on its next transport run. Their base of influence, so the core of the faction, is their Koios Grand University. Anyone in Ascent will tell you it's the best university in the galaxy. While that might be disputed, it has a definite claim on being the most competitive. Slacking on a group project here won't just earn your fellow students ire, it'll probably earn you a few demands for deadly jewels. Next up are their Vanguard cadres, which are the Laureate Spyridon Velatos' personal guard. It's the personal guard of the current leader of Ascent. While they guard the man who won the most difficult position in Ascent, earning a spot in their ranks is nearly as difficult. A new member can only join if they manage to best a current member in a duel. And finally, their post-tech industry, not infantry, that'd be a very different asset, is the Lemoni Customs, the primary contractor for the construction of the system-wide Skyhook infrastructure. Lemoni have their hands in every sort of astrospace construction, from orbital hooks and space stations to custom engine parts for private ship owners. So representing some of their faction cred generation in astrospace industry.
Great. Thanks for all of that introduction. And I've gone ahead and added the different titles from the assets from their lore submission onto the lore field on the spreadsheet tracking the game. So if you open up that map now, there's a possibility that hopefully, if it's all working correctly, you'll be able to see the different titles for these assets. So any other faction, if you'd like to, you can submit the same type of thing, these sort of different titles or a short sentence about the asset, and we'll be able to add it into the spreadsheet so that it's available right there. And then also, if you put up wiki articles, I'm sure we'll be able to find a way to redirect to those. I think that covers everything from Ascent, though, doesn't it?
That's everything they provided us for this turn. Yep.
Cool. So with them appropriately taken care of, we have our next faction to cover with the Larkspur Combine. Unfortunately, I don't have an image from them. They're still working out their final versions of their logos, from my understanding. So we don't have a fun logo to show or anything, but we do have a small little announcement that I'm going to read out from them. The award-winning electro swing duo Gangbusters, composed of Edward Larkspur and Elizabeth Zamfir, are coming to Club 451 to start their sector-wide tour right here on Gome. Come on down and let Elizabeth's musical beats move you as Edward entrances you with his golden voice. The duo will be playing a selection of tracks off their newest album, Insiders, inspired by their lifelong friendship growing up on the frigid homestead of Moss. This new album is a message to the people of the sector to work hard and persevere through unity. They both hope that you'll come on down to Club 451 to check them out. Well, it seems like Larkspur here has a electric swing duo that's getting ready to go on tour throughout the sector.
Yeah, I don't know about you, but I want to get down to Club 451.
Yeah, I'd be interested in acquiring tickets. Maybe management can get that for us.
Absolutely.
So next up is Assembled Commonwealth. And I believe they've provided a very lovely graphic for us here, and a news report from their upcoming assemblies. So, Cal, would you mind taking away their report?
Yeah, breaking news within our breaking news show. Their report reads: The great and good of the Commonwealth returned to Nehaven today with the 21st opening of the Assembly. The ceremony began, as always, with the procession of the regional representatives of the Commonwealth communities. Tensions were palpable between Representative Alders and Representative Hayden after their fierce debate during the Assembly's last session. Following close behind were the representatives of the guilds, joined by the newest inductees from the Union of Cooperative Guilds. Shockingly, Master Vestry retained their position as representative from the Fellowship of Nehaven, despite their severe losses in the final quarter of last year. Charter captains and representatives of the Navy were the final members to enter the chamber. Charter Captain Davin and Admiral Irvine were in deep conversation as they entered, no doubt discussing the worrying reports of increasing pirate activity throughout Beacon space. The Navy has been under increased pressure to respond more forcefully to the pirates occupying areas of the Balder Belt within Asta itself. Once all representatives were seated, the Eighth Ark was escorted into the chamber by members of the Royal Marine Guard. The Eighth Ark took his place at the central podium and prepared to read the opening passages of the Commonwealth Constitution, as tradition demands. The Eighth Ark had been unseen in public since the closing of the assembly a month ago, although his daughter, the Ethering Senwin, has been increasingly present in society. Many are speculating on the Eighth Ark's desire to abdicate in favor of their daughter, though representatives have made it clear that this could risk a constitutional crisis, as the Ethering Senwin continues to espouse her belief in a return to the days before the assembly was granted increased powers by the House of Ida. The Eighth Ark ended the ceremony with the following words, quote, "As we celebrate the opening of this assembly, let us not forget the events that led us here. The dark days of the Idarai crisis. We still live with the scars of those calamitous days, but the Commonwealth is strong. We strive to grow, to rebuild and reclaim our world. In the process, we will make the sector a better place for all. For the common good, we work together. With peace and prosperity, we rise as one." The business of the assembly began immediately following the ceremony, with the Six of Finance submitting their proposed budget. Despite the support from both the guilds and the Navy, the response from the regional representatives was mixed. The proposal features lower tariffs on imported raw materials, claiming that domestic supply has yet to catch up with the increased demand of Idarai industry. It also includes an increase in naval funding to construct new escort ships that would protect trading vessels from the rising pirate threat. Representative Zhao defined the Six's budget as ambitious but unsustainable. The Six promised that taxes would not be raised for the coming year, yet they propose a budget that would significantly increase governmental expenses. Where do they plan on finding the money? Representative Zhao asked. The Six's proposed budget did include new sources of revenue, as well as possible ways of mitigating the economic burden of the reforms. Negotiations are underway with several Saintist abbeys to acquire technological artifacts for military use, a move that has sparked more controversy than it solved. Although the Saintist doctrine prohibits the sale of their services for money, some worry about the influence this trade would grant them over certain branches of the government, especially considering the number of Saintist faithfuls that already chair important roles in the military industry. A program to establish outposts in other sectors as a way of increasing revenue was agreed upon in the previous assembly session. The initial reports as part of this program were read aloud in the chamber. Efforts on Icaros were described as frustrating, and that the local population has an, quote, "inherent distrust of outsiders and an aversion to trade in anything other than basic commodities," end quote. While there are still potential avenues of trade, especially with the Koyos Grand University, efforts may be better spent elsewhere for the time being. Longza also failed to meet expectations. Reports confirmed the market was extremely small, with the sole advantage being exceptionally pleasant conditions on the planet. Any exploitation of the planet's resources, however, would require extensive investment. Despite these disappointing beginnings, the Assembly agreed that the future of the Commonwealth rests on its expansion, authorizing the program to continue. Lastly, the First Space Lord gave a report on naval readiness. With the selling of many of the older vessels in the fleet last month, naval capacity was significantly reduced. However, the First Space Lord assured the Assembly that the vessels were laid down in the latest expansion program were only months away from deployment. Operations Scimitar and Bluecoat were announced, which will see ships of the home fleet redeployed in trade protection roles to cover any shortfalls. While nothing explosive occurred within the opening of the Assembly today, the first signs of a possible constitutional crisis and issues in naval production have been shown publicly, setting the potential for some of the most complicated political years in Commonwealth history since the formation of their Assembly. And that was the end of their news report.
Thank you, Cal. They produced a wonderful graphic here that we've been displaying on screen simultaneously. They've also got some information regarding the weather on Nighthaven, along with some other, I assume, headlines that are in the rest of their what would be the full news report from the what they call it, the Adari News Network. If you want to check out this full graphic, I'm sure they'll make it available in the Discord in one of the channels in the near future. Well, thank you, Cal, for reading that out, and yeah, thanks to the Commonwealth for providing that.
Yeah,
Before
it's
we
a very
move on,
pretty submission.
yes, it is. Before we move on to our next faction, I wanted to take a quick moment to say if you're new here and you don't really know what's going on, welcome to Beacom Space. We'd appreciate you following along and checking us out in the near future. We host a monthly lore stream, which you're watching right now, along with a monthly faction turn stream where we roll some dice and process some turn actions following along from a custom variant of the rules from Stars Without Numbers, including their faction turn game transitioned into being a multiplayer game. If you're interested in checking us out, you can join the Discord server and you can join a faction, help world build the creative space of Beacon Space, and help to create some of these fun pieces of artwork and text presentations that you're seeing today, along with participate in the mechanical game of placing assets onto different planets and seeing what happens. We're getting ready to have some fun exploration. I suspect happen in this upcoming turn, and turn one happens in the first weekend of October. The official stream date will be announced on the Discord channel, so make sure you're there to check it out later. With that, let's get back to our faction announcements. And I believe we've got the Aguamala Syndicate here to do next. So let me pull their PowerPoint that they produced for us up. All
They
right,
have a
there we are.
presentation for us.
Yeah, they've got a great little PowerPoint that we'll run through here. So this is the Aguamala's Syndicate, their first presentation. So we've got a faction overview from them. That the Aguamala Syndicate is a collective of organizations with a focus on the hunting of different space fauna that heavily rely on the use of different technologies as part of their hunting, specifically drones and automation. The criminal aspect of this faction largely involves illicit trade and hunting, with the leadership of the faction being heavily involved with those endeavors. Aguamala is a relatively small faction as compared to the population of its homeworld, with only about 15 million members compared to the hundreds of million present on their home planet. Cal, do you happen to remember their home planet by chance?
Kakaduk?
Maybe. I don't recall. I have to go check the
Oh,
spreadsheet.
no, that's the Concord. Oops.
That's all right.
Aguamala is Nueva Talk. I can never pronounce
Oh,
it.
yes. Yeah, that's their planet name. I would have to
I'll have
see
to
it to
look
be
up
able
the
to pronounce it.
pronunciation guide.
There's one on the wiki, I believe. But you want to go through their organization and structure for Aguamala here, Cal?
Sure, they've organized themselves in a very interesting way into 5 tiers, starting with the civilians, which is not their largest group, but it is the bottom of the pile. It's the staff, the families, and the retired members that make up their civilian population. And then the majority of their faction is their supporting organizations, who are responsible for managing the planets and conducting trade, and generally supporting the more specialized organizations, such as the expert organizations, which is the next tier up, which is any organization that isn't focused on hunting. Most are focused on research and development, with a supporting focus on their robotics and their weapons. And then they have their lodges, which is probably the most distinctive part, which is their elite organizations of hunters that are bound by common philosophy. They are regarded as being the elite, the highest organizations, and they're all run by a very small population of syndicate leadership, of which many are tied to the criminal underworld that is present for the Aguamala Syndicate.
Thanks for their introduction. And I've been reminded that their homeworld is called Nueva Cuauhtémoc, as I believe is the correct pronunciation. It takes after one of the Aztec rulers from a city name. So I believe Cuauhtémoc is the correct pronunciation using Spanish background. But
yeah, as we'll see in a moment, they've pulled a lot from that kind of aesthetic.
Yeah, let's see on here. So we've got their first emblem here being the emblem of the business-oriented front. This is a set of jellyfish taking, in fact, from their name here, Aguamala, which in Spanish could translate to jellyfish. It's used as their official legal business as a way of separating the criminal and non-criminal arrangements, and this would be the emblem that most individuals in the sector would recognize. Cal, you want to introduce their not-so-legal symbol here?
Yeah, the emblem of Cartel Aguamala is a very distinctive design. I'll just read what they've put, which is the dragon emblem is used by the Cartel, the criminal organization that runs much of the faction's operations behind the scenes. And if you see this, then you are probably in the underworld. It's only used in that kind of area. I imagine the average civilian who sees this would be very scared and kind of know about it by reputation. It's a very distinctive design, very well made.
That's a great logo for the underworld aspects of the Aguamala here.
Yeah, it's fantastic.
So then we get onto this general faith philosophy that the Syndicate refers to as El Destino, which centers around the belief that the fate is determined by the dice of fate, which are in fact cast to determine an outcome, rather than attributions for or against the divinites bringing direct results. They contribute to the dice pools for or against an individual when they are cast to determine El Destino's course. It is heavily influenced by the Syndicate's cultural emphasis on hunting. So I assume I've seen some artwork in the works for what these dice could look like for the faction, and they are in fact, I believe, legitimate dice that get rolled. So I'm interested to see how that lore develops and what fun things come out of that.
Given that in the faction turn, they're closer to the truth than many in the sector, that their fate is determined by some dice.
It is a cool interaction between the two, yes.
Absolutely.
And then, of course, the final individual parts of their presentation here is they've asked if you've had any questions to reach out to different members of their faction on the Discord channel, and they've provided a sort of standard in-character / out-of-character disclaimer about their work. So, with that,
Usually good to include.
yeah, absolutely, a quick understanding of how the individual content you've seen there reflects IC, out-of-character, etc. So that's their presentation, very nicely completed. We thank them for their contribution to the stream here. And up next, we've got Concord of Mutual Disdain, who provided a video introduction to their faction. So let's take a look at that.
Welcome to Cardicook, home of the Concord of Mutual Disdain. As this is your first time on planet, we would like to introduce you to two of the species that make up our faction, the Queltel and the Tarret. No one enjoys being poked or prodded by tourists. Please be polite when requesting photo ops. We hope you enjoy our breathtaking undersea cities, delicious food, and lush resorts. Currently, we have 4 assets on planet. Diving is one of the longest-standing tourism industries on Cardicook, and security expeditions stand head and shoulders above the competition. Known for arranging once-in-a-lifetime encounters with the glorious sea life, a spot on one of these dives costs a small fortune, and they're regularly booked years in advance. Coralgar Works is an industry leader in the production of corallite, an organic compound that has many uses in Cardassian culture. From culinary traditions to artistic pursuits, this unique material is a cultural touchstone, and Kralgar is synonymous with quality. There is little room for direct political influence in the Concord's governmental structure. As a result, interest groups band together, like the lobbyists of the Black Ocean Collective, who seek to encourage the Concord's expansion out into the sector. The ancestors were lucky and escaped from their imprisonment in the depths. But there are still undiscovered cell blocks, leftovers of an ancient prison. The bunker busters are elite skirmishers, responsible for extracting living prisoners and putting down anything that succumbed to the madness of long isolation.
Apparently there was an echo there that was not intentional, so I do apologize for that. The version of that video that I'm sure will be available in the Discord afterwards will not have the echo, so I apologize for that. I believe I can get that fixed for the next video presentation we have.
Yeah, it's a very informative video, and it's good to see because this setting is going to be quite diverse with lots of aliens being accepted. And we have a note to mention that the aliens on stream were supposed to be labeled, but we're not. So the monster ones are the Taret, and the more humanoid ones are the Culetl. So two of our species be introduced to in this video. Looking forward to seeing more of them.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's fun to see the artwork that's coming out of Concord of Mutual Disdain. They've got some great artwork for all of the different species that are in the works. So I'm excited to see what else they come up with and how these species interact with the different factions in the sector. Anything else to remark on them, Cal, before we move along to our next faction?
Nope, I'm excited to see more of the Concord.
Cool. So unfortunately, management was unable to acquire some report from the Amelhart Institute for this lore stream, so we'll look forward to having a report in the near future for them. Cal, do you have anything to report on management's reporters' shortcomings this stream?
They will be docked in pay, and we will make sure that next time they put some more effort into digging out the stories in the sector.
Absolutely. We'll have to make sure that reporter gets an appropriate marks on their quarterly reviews.
Absolute failing on their part. Yep.
With that out of the way, we'll move on to Tahora Fai's introduction here, who they have another video as well, and hopefully, I believe I have fixed the echo issue so that we won't have that again. So let's take a listen here to Tahora Fai's introduction.
Gather round, children, and hear the story of our people. Long ago, the Tahora Fai were many people. All heard the song of the beacon and left their ancient homes to find a new one. Their journeys were long and arduous. Our ancestors arrived in many disparate places and found themselves alone, their ships stranded. The Kairaki of our ancestors despaired, for all seemed lost. But then they saw the great Tahora, the greatest whales of the abyss. Following them, the many peoples of our ancestors made their way to Dine, which was in those times a lush and verdant world. Our ancestors gathered there, but there was no arena to bring peace and understanding to the many people. so our ancestors fought amongst themselves and with others that had also come by myriad ways to the Toothed Star. The war was long, and Dine suffered for it. The wisest Kairahi of our ancestors came together and agreed that the war must end. Learning from the great Daora that had guided them to Dine, our ancestors created the Vok. From that voice came the arena, and from that song the many peoples of our ancestors became one people, the Daora Phi. Though our ancestors had found peace, there were still others who refused the arena. They saw our song as a threat and sought to destroy us. They failed, but not before Daine's ate a wasteland. With Daine devastated, the others saw no value in the world. They left the Toothed Star for another, and the Daora Phi were too weak to stop them. Again it seemed that our ancestors would perish. They fled to the high mountains to escape the poisoned air, but their resources were few. Once again the great Daora provided. Our ancestors followed them again, and took their meat to eat, and their bones to build. As they had done before, the great Daora, now with their smaller cousins, brought the Daora Phi life and home. For centuries we have labored, bolstered by the Daora both great and small, to make our world a paradise again. But we have found no answers with the Toothed Star. Now we must seek new stars and hope for answers to heal our world. Let the others beware, for if we find them in the void, there will be no mercy.
Well, that was a great video by Tahora Fai, a wonderful introduction to their faction and the aesthetic they're going for. I'm quite thrilled about the sort of unusual, I would say, language influence that they've got, picking up from Polynesian cultures, which will be quite interesting to see how that develops into a fully formed faction here. You have any thoughts on their presentation, Cal?
It's very distinct, and I'm impressed between, we have a few like hunters and also aquatic themed factions, and they've all managed to make themselves very culturally distinct. And this is a very strong showing, and I'm excited to see more.
Yeah, absolutely. It'll be interesting to see how all of these factions develop, and hopefully we get some more fantastic videos in the future from Tahora Fai.
I don't want to meet whoever was speaking that in a dark alley.
It was a great voice presentation for sure. We do have one final video and one faction, but definitely not the least. Starlit Court rounds up our selection here of faction announcements and introductions. They've also produced a video for us, so we'll throw it over to their video here, and after that we'll move into the next segment of our stream. But for now, here's the Starlit Court's introduction.
Hail and well met, prospective client. We of the Starlit Court have noted your interest in our mercenary services. As such, we have extended this informational packet to you. We have found that through distributing this primer on our culture and practices, that satisfaction among previous clients has increased, and needless violence has decreased. We encourage you to share this information with your people as a whole, as we of the Starlit Court are always welcoming of outsiders interested in our culture. Now, please partake of the first packet, a primer on the Starlit Path.
Hello and welcome to this introduction to the Starlit Path. Your interest in the path to enlightenment is something we are incredibly happy to see and hope to encourage. There are many parts that make up the day-to-day actions and interactions of an adherent to the path, but we will start in this presentation with the core beliefs of those who follow the teachings of the High King. The main goal of those who walk the Starlit Path is enlightenment. The founder of our faith, the High King, left us with many teachings that are meant to guide us to this objective. Among these are the tenets of enlightenment, the mantras for order and against chaos, and the 8 knightly virtues. The state of enlightenment is a higher state of mind where one can see beyond the chaos of existence and direct it for the betterment of their people. The tenets of enlightenment come in 4 parts: knowledge of the self, perfection of the self, knowledge of the other, and perfection of the other. First, knowledge of the self. The path to enlightenment is a very personal journey which varies greatly depending on the traveller. As such, the first step on the path is introspection, through meditation and guidance to understand yourself and where you're starting from. Second, perfection of the self. To reach enlightenment, you must strive for perfection. So, as such, training yourself to a high degree within a particular sphere, such as the forge or the field, or even the knightly arts of combat, is an integral part of your journey along the path. Third, knowledge of the other. An understanding that we are all limited in our perspective and comprehension is an important lesson that we all must learn. Because of this, we must temper our own insight and efforts within the cold light of reality and the teachings of our elders. Fourth, once we have an understanding that is providing us spiritual growth, we are beholden to our path to ensure that others are also able to follow the route we have taken. Therefore, the passing on of our insights and understandings to those around us, in the form of lessons or in the products of our well-practiced work, is an outworking of the seeds of enlightenment in our lives. There are 2 mantras that the travellers on the starlit path use to guide their thinking: the mantra against chaos and the mantra for order. The mantra against chaos goes, "Existence is chaos. Chaos creates confusion. Confusion promotes ignorance. Ignorance leads to suffering. Suffering becomes desolation. Desolation is the end of all things." The mantra for order follows a similar pattern. Honor is order. Order creates peace. Peace promotes understanding. Understanding leads to progress. Progress becomes mastery. Mastery will grant us enlightenment. These mantras were taught to us by the High King. During his reign, many grains of truth like this were recorded. These are some of his most well-known words, as they are often recited as parts of various rites, and many of the most spiritual recite them daily. One of the favourite teachings of the knightly orders is the 8 knightly virtues, where the tenets provide a basic outline of the path we must walk, and the mantras explain our goal. The knightly virtues give us a list of attributes and ideals we can use to direct our daily actions. These virtues are unity, diligence, justice, compassion, resolve, courage, honour, and mercy. We remember these virtues and how they may direct our goals and actions with the words of the High King, sometimes known as the mantra of the virtues. Unity, the first virtue, from which all the others follow. We are one in purpose and direction, diligence. We are all equal under the law, justice. We are one people who are all important and all worthy of care, compassion. Our collective will is what drives us forward, resolve. In the face of these challenges we remain undaunted, courage. All of our actions affect those around us, so we must strive to uphold all of these in our day-to-day, honour. Despite this leading us into inevitable conflict with those not of seeking, we do not revel in strife, mercy. I hope this introduction to the beliefs of the Starlit Path has been helpful, and look forward to helping you on your journey along the path to enlightenment.
Well, that was a wonderful introduction to the Starlit Court. It's quite interesting to see the angle they've taken on their Holy Knights and mercenary group coming together in one. What do you think of their culture primer introduction there, Cal?
I can just picture it playing very serenely in the cockpit of a mech that is dropping from orbit into mercenary combat.
Absolutely. To follow those teachings well.
Inner peace while raining lead upon their enemies.
That's the next video. I want a lovely sermon being delivered with the battle fights in the background. I think with that out of the way, though, that introduces us to all of our factions so far. It's fun to see all of their different introductions and their way of choosing what information they wanted to present and share with us and what all they finalized. Hopefully, you've learned some more about the different factions today, and many of them have begun getting their work up on the wiki. So if you're interested in checking out more, you can check out our wiki page at beaconspace.unrestrictedlorefare.com, and you'll be able to find some of these different faction pages. Some of the information may be getting up over the next couple of days, so it may not all be available at exactly this moment, but hopefully it'll be there over the next couple of days, and you'll be able to learn about these factions in a little bit more detail. So
All
with
the
that,
factions have been working really hard, and it's very nice to see.
yeah, absolutely, it's fun to see all the different content that's coming out and following along the discussions of all the different lore creation. With that, though, I think that wraps up our faction introduction segment, and we'll be going into the results of the timeline next. So let me pull up the information I need to be able to do that. And we're going to be following a designated procedure here to roll out the different events. So we're gonna start by rolling out the different eras, and then we'll fill in the timeline from there with the different minor events inside of each of those. So, Deeds, would you like to give us an introduction to the eras of our timeline?
Yeah, for sure. So our timeline is divided into kind of 9 distinct eras, ranging from the prehistory, which kind of represents the beginning of the time, to the era of peace, which represents this most recent era of relative lack of conflict prior to the faction turn beginning. Uh, so I guess in order. Um, the prehistory era is kind of meant to be a time where written record isn't really available, or if it is, it isn't in, meant to be trusted or whole. It's kind of the like nothing is certain about the prehistory time. It's from before Beacon Space was really relevant to the people currently living in it. Uh, our next era is the beacon activates. It's when the beacon of that Beacon Space is named for first turned on, summoning everyone to Beacon Space. It is this like very nascent period for the region. Um, next era is the time following after the activation and the first use of the gates. Uh, it's before major settlers have arrived, or major waves of settlers have arrived to the sector, but they've small colonies have begun to pop up, and people are beginning to use the gates to travel around. Uh, the year after that is major wave of colonists arriving. It's the primary wave of uh, aliens and other non-humans arriving in the sector. Uh, at this point would be when a lot of colonies were established. And, the kind of sector culture began getting fleshed out. As the next event following that would be when humans arrive. This is kind of referring to the era that like humans show up. It, I think because it's so closely related to the major wave of colonists, I think it's probably appropriate that the two are viewed as one to some cultures, but obviously the arrival of humans was a major enough event on its own to warrant being called out as separate. Uh, yes, after humans arrive, we have the glitch. The glitch kind of refers to a mysterious event where the gate network deactivated for about a month, kind of sowing chaos and making uh, interstellar travel suddenly quite unreliable. And when the gate network turned back on, not all systems were connected. Uh, After the glitch, we have the Great Migration, which was a massive migration of the space fauna, the whales, and the other creatures that dwell in the void, kind of moving across beacon space. And it's kicking off a heyday for the various hunting factions. Our second to last era are the Beacon Wars, a period of protracted conflict between many powers, most of them now defunct, destroyed by the conflict that they created, kind of priming us for the era of peace that followed and the near century of lack of conflict preceding the faction turn.
Cool. Thank you for running through the broad interpretation of these eras that we'll be rolling up sometimes for. So if I'm understanding our rolling procedures here, each of these eras are going to be equal to 90 years plus an X d20 years in length, where X is the different number of events in that era. So would you be able to tell me how many events are in the prehistory era so we can roll that out and figure out how long prehistory lasts for?
I think actually it'd be better if we worked backwards for this, just
Sure.
because we'll be working into years ago rather than from a forward date.
Fair enough. That would probably make more sense. So then we'll start with the era of peace then.
Yeah.
Which we're
so the
going
era
to.
of peace will be with 1d20, so 90 plus 1d20 years in length.
Great. So the era of peace was 101 years ago then. Rolling here in this Roll20 game. Or has lasted for 101 years, I guess.
The Beacon Wars will be 90 plus 40-20.
90 plus 4d20.
Mhm.
So the Beacon Wars lasted for 127 years. The Great Migration?
90 plus 5d20.
Lasting for 150 years. Then how many events are in the glitch?
A 3, so 90 plus 3d20.
Sweet. That was rolled incorrectly. Let me fix that. For 134 years with 2 20s showing up in that dice roll. So
Wow.
actually, wait a second. Isn't the glitch called out as lasting for only a month?
The glitch is only a month long, but the historical era defined by the glitch could definitely be a lot longer than that.
Fair enough. Yeah. So we've got
It's more about the time between the glitch and the Great Migration.
very reasonable enough. The glitch is probably the precipitating event for this era of time. So how many years ago back did humans arrive in? And let's find that out.
5 events.
5d20 with 141 years for that era. The major wave of colonists that were non-human.
Also 5 events.
All right, so 90 plus 5d20. And for everyone interested, yes, when I rolled the 90 on accident, I did roll a 1 on the die. Okay, so major wave of colonists lasts 135 years. How many events are in the first instance of gate travel?
We have 3 there.
Right, so going for 129 years. And then the beacon activates lasts for?
Will be 2 events.
Great. So 117 years there. And I don't. Do we need to roll for prehistory, or it's
No.
just all time preceding this?
Prehistory would be all time preceding the beacon activates.
Great. So to assign a year value to each of these is the intent to sum everything up, and we're in whatever the current year is. So our 0 starts at wherever the beacon activates, or
I think right now I'll just work backwards, and I think the setting truths have outlined that factions don't necessarily time keep in each way, in the same way, and so we'll use human Earth years as reference for now. But in the future, this timeline could be adapted to fit the many different temporal standards in the
sure.
setting.
So the standard here is just sticking with Earth years for the purposes of satisfying communication between everyone involved in adding events to these timelines. But we'll be interested in seeing how different factions convert their time into a timekeeping method of their choice. Cool.
They probably have different year zeros depending on an event that's very significant to themselves as well.
Absolutely. I'm sure each faction's private timeline will end up more detailed than this one. So, we're going to be going backwards. We're going to be starting with the events in the era of peace, then, correct?
Actually, for replacing the events, I think it makes more sense to proceed forward.
It's all right. Okay, so we'll jump up here to prehistory. And do we have some events to place in prehistory?
We do. I don't think the events in prehistory need to be rolled right now.
No, I'd agree with
I
that.
think
They can just
it's
be listed as things that happen.
so we have two events that go into prehistory. The first is that the first of the precursors find the beacon and begin to colonize beacon space. Colonize being in quotations. This is kind of referring to the progenitors that placed many of the ruins around beacon space in the worlds, and potentially also constructed the gates. I guess when it describes them finding the beacon, we could also kind of leave that up for interpretation. It doesn't necessarily need to be the same beacon as what was discovered. I know there was some thoughts that it could also indicate maybe a potential cyclical nature to the space that we're in.
Very interesting. It'd be fun to see how different factions have discovered elements of these different precursors and what impact they have on our sector as we begin a re-exploration of some of the space that was lost and from the gate network. Then there was a second event for this time period. Do you mind giving that us?
We received a second event. This event's from the Concord of Mutual Disdain. It describes the alien jailers that made Kartakuk into an aquatic prison and imprisoned their ancestors on the planet.
Cool.
It's, I think, unknown if they're related to the progenitors that activated the beacon, or if they are a separate group that either came after or potentially even pre-exists them. Something that we could find out in the future.
And presumably these prehistory events are just what we can put together with very limited evidence. Is what we believe happened, but it's all shrouded in the before recorded history kind of deal.
Yes.
Absolutely. Cool. So it gives us some interesting prehistory events, and I believe the mention of this last event that is specifically an event that was added for Concord of Mutual Disdain is a point of mention that we'd actually like factions to be able to have the ability to add their events that impact major ideas to their faction onto the official sector timeline as well. We'll be going into a little bit more details about that later, but keep in mind that this is something that we will be willing to add in the future to the timeline, even after the stream. So with that, I think we're going to start rolling up events for the beacon activates then.
Yes. So as we kind of proceed with rolling events, an event can be in any year within the era that it is a part of. If we roll the same year twice, we will end up re-rolling the event. And I guess in the case that we have one or more events, or I guess two or more events with an implied order between them, we will kind of preserve the random dates and reorder the events as such so that they make sense.
So with that, let's roll up the time for the first event in Beacon Activates. So I need to roll a D117, I believe.
Hmm.
So our first event happens in year 93 of Beacon Activates. Which event is that?
So that is a great flashlight, could be seen from every corner of the galaxy that Beacon's face is within. It's a signal, perhaps related to the or related to the activation of the beacon. It could be a separate event, but a great visual signal accompanied the emanating beacon from Beacon space.
Great. And then do we have an additional information, another event for this sector?
Yes. The second event is that the bleed spills over into our dimension.
Great. And that happens in year 8 of Beacon activating.
Yeah.
I can apparently type correctly, though. That's not happening. There we are. Do you have any additional thoughts on this event?
I imagine, like, because of where it's placed and the fact that there is unlikely to be many people in Beacon space at the time, that it's maybe one of the few things scientifically that we've been able to nail down about the bleed, or perhaps there's some sort of natural phenomena occurred that kind of that we can use to date.
As we move out of prehistory, these are all events that we know for sure happened. So I'm interested to know what kind of sources and information we have that confirm that this is when the bleed spilled over.
It'll be interesting to see what different factions come up with to explain this event. I believe you said there were only 2 events in this era, so we'll move on to the first instance of gate travel, I believe.
Yeah.
And how many events are there for this era?
So we have 3 events to place in the era following the use of the gates. The first of which is the first gate accident occurs where hazardous material passes through one, igniting when coming into contact with the gate energy, killing everyone aboard the vessel.
Sure, so that'll happen in year 36 of this era.
Relatively small period before everyone's world was rocked by a major gate-related disaster.
Well, it didn't take long.
Second is a new type of cargo ship is invented to best use the gates.
Well, so that, according to random dice rolls, will take place on year 98 of this era. And then our final event will take place in year 89.
Yes, that's the a group devotes themselves to rerouting these two with little success, but involves many wild tries / methods. Uh, Probably kicking off a very long history of attempting to modify the gates while also uh, warily trying to avoid a gate accident.
Fair enough.
They found many different versions of what not to do, at least.
Certainly.
Cool. That brings us on to the major wave of colonists era. How many events do we have in this first major wave of primarily non-human colonists?
We have 5 we need to place.
Sure. So our first one will end up here in year 113.
So that one is space piracy goes into full swing, uh, which likely indicates that trade in beacon space has finally risen to the level where a sustained quote unquote industry of piracy is now viable.
Some fashion probably rose and fall in that era.
Yeah.
Year 124 will be our next relevant event.
So that will be when the bleed was discovered. Of course, we've noted when the bleed kind of breached into this dimension. So I suspect this relates to when uh, we s- we started to identify individuals that were uh, blessed / cursed with the bleed.
Under the influence of, perhaps, yes.
Yeah.
Year 7 brings us our third event in this era.
That would be when the first precursor ruin is discovered.
An appropriately early event to have happen as colonists reclaim the space, perhaps?
Curious how that may have contributed to the wave of colonization accelerating.
Absolutely. Let's see, our fourth event in this era takes place in year 104.
That is, a number of colonies discover similar plant and animal life with no fossil records, suggesting their biospheres were artificially created by the precursors.
Interesting.
I think that fits, after a nearly a century of study of these ruins and the planets that these cultures come to inhabit, that they've begun to realize that there's maybe some sort of greater structure going on.
Oh, absolutely. And our final event for this era takes place in year 85.
That being, it's a diplomatic incident between two species where one resembles the prey of the other.
Cool. So we have received a question about one of the events in this era. So we were asking about if piracy fell, or did everyone just get used to it, as there are a couple of factions currently that participate in the underworld nature of such. So we think that these are probably, if I had to guess, probably descendants of the initial space pirates, but I would suspect the factions themselves have changed hands several times.
Yeah, I think piracy is just a natural consequence of preying upon vulnerable trade. And as the sector has grown and developed, uh, the piracy is kind of, I'm sure, joined it in lockstep, uh,
Absolutely.
especially with a lack of a power that kind of stretches across all of beacon space.
Very reasonable. So we move on to our next era where humans arrive. How many events do we have for this era?
This one also has 5 events that we need to place.
Great. So the first event happens in year 31.
That is the human's invention of the first AI. in Beacon Space. I think this would represent the kind of beginning of artificial life really taking off and being produced within Beacon Space. I don't think it necessarily precludes artificial life kind of arriving alongside the migration waves and
It's sort of
being
the first time.
effectively other alien races that have joined us in Beacon Space.
Correct. It's just the first time that it is developed here, perhaps, rather than arriving.
Yeah.
And what's our next event for this era?
After that, we have a common drug for several alien species. Their version of aspirin is found to be a potent psychotropic among humans, leading to a drug epidemic.
Interesting. This actually takes place 4 years prior to humans inventing the first true AI or developing the first true AI in Beacon Space. So perhaps there's a connection
Perhaps
here.
The gosh, I forgot what it's called. when
That's
you're drunk and you're programming.
Oh, yes. I don't remember the name, but that is certainly an interesting correlation to draw. Our third event in this era, moving quickly on from however the humans managed to invent the first true AI, takes place in year 44. What would that be?
It's humans attempting to colonize an unsettled world, unsettled in quotes, of populated by sentient plants with a parasitic life cycle.
Hmm,
The entire colony is converted.
interesting. Wonder if we know which planet that was in our relevant planets in the sector or not. We don't currently, but we'll see if that develops.
Yeah, there's certainly a few planets which would imply that they should have wide-scale human settlement and don't. That could make prime candidates for this. Although, of course, it also is before the glitch, so maybe this world lies somewhere out there, yet
Absolutely.
undiscovered.
We'll see. Maybe we'll discover a parasitic plant life-filled planet in our exploration. Our fourth event for this era takes place in year 57. You mind introducing us to that?
It's a group of linguists of different species get together to make translation guides between the most common center languages. It's the first step towards some sort of translation system between the various aliens that make up Beacon Space.
Great. And then our final event for this era then happens in year 19.
Humans make peaceful contact with the first species they meet, which then introduce them to the gates.
It's a great thing to happen early on in this era. Great, so that takes care of the era where humans arrive. Let me check and see if there's any questions in chat. Looks like the only thing is a comment on our plant xenomorphs being confirmed in the sector. It'll be interesting to see if we determine what planet those are on, and if they have any impact in exploration, for sure. So our next era of time is the glitch. Let's see, how many events do we have for that sector? Or for that era, sorry.
3.
3, all right. Our first event for this era then takes place in year 105.
And with the climatic destruction of a system by a supernova.
Maybe we'll find the shattered ruins of this world somewhere in the exploration of Beacon Space.
Mm-hmm.
caused by a gate or cosmic coincidence. Who knows?
Perhaps science will be able to tell us if we discover such a system. Our next era for this, or next event in this era, excuse me, happens in year 98.
So this one refers to the rise of a doomsday cult on a populated world that sort of believes that the glitch was a climatic event intended to punish the peoples of Beacon Space from the same force that destroyed the precursors prior to everyone's arrival in Beacon Space.
Interesting. And our third event for this era takes place in year 126. What would that be?
So that's in effort to restore one of the off-network gates that goes spectacularly wrong.
How unfortunate.
Likely the descendants of the gate rerouters of eras past.
Great. And there's a note on the list that it could be any number of different errors. It has not yet been determined, even hundreds of years into the future. Great. How many events do we have of the era of the Great Migration?
5.
All right. So our first event for this era takes place in year 93.
So that would be hunting starts in full force. The rapid increase in quantity of the creatures is seen as a plague with no check. Somewhat surprisingly late into the Great Migration, but I guess that would imply that the Great Migration might have been the beginning of a decades to century-long mating ritual.
Perhaps.
Uh,
Year 90, 3 years prior to this, hunting starting in full force, gives us our next event for this era.
that would be the study and hunting of the newly arrived megafauna leads to ubiquitous and flagrant infractions over established borders. These large uptick in hunters ignoring established agreements.
Leading into full-fledged resurgence in hunting. Makes sense. Year 73 brings us our next event in this era.
That would be a pod of megafauna passing through a bleed-infused nebula, emerging on the other side with strange capabilities and increased aggression.
Seems the bleed impacts more than just the alien life in our sector that lives on planets. It also interacts with the megafauna that live in space. Quite interesting.
I wonder if this pod of megafauna still exists as a perhaps unexpected danger out there.
It'd be quite interesting to encounter in an exploration. Year 2 for this era gives us our fourth event.
An alien species captures a number of megafauna and begin experimenting with ways to turn them into bioengineered FTL ships.
Interesting. I wonder if they were at all successful in their efforts to do so. Suppose a current faction may let us know of those results. And year 127 gives us the final event for this era.
That would be many recent arrivals to Beacon Space have their ships hacked by explorers/archaeologists searching for maps and information pertaining to ruins. I think we have many truths that establish the archaeological career path as very cutthroat and in Beacon Space, and
Yep.
maybe archaeologist is much more synonymous with criminal than
we may have
we would
originally
previous.
figured.
Mhm.
Yeah, very interesting. That wraps up the primary events for the era of the Great Migration. Then, how many events do we have for the sector of the era of space? Excuse me, called the Beacon Wars.
We have 4.
Great. So our first event takes place in year 83 of this era.
Yeah, that would be an ancient invasion fleet suddenly exits from a gate in the middle of a major battle, overwhelming both participants and capturing a planet.
Interesting. Somebody seems to have gotten stuck in gate transit for longer than they intended.
Yeah. I wonder if this is related at all to the glitch.
It could be. Let's see, our second event for this era takes place 14 years later, year 97.
This one is human militarists launch an invasion of several worlds and attempt to seize their resources.
Well,
Humans once again
imperialism still
proving
managed,
that they're the bad guys.
and that imperialism still manages to exist. Fair enough. Let's see what happens for our third event taking place. Oh, we have to re-roll as we rolled the same year again. Taking place in year 39 then. What event takes place now?
One of the major powers retreats into unknown parts of Beacon space, despite cautions against it, and has not been heard from since.
Interesting. We have a missing faction on the loose. Maybe we'll encounter them in our exploration as well. Or at least find their ruins, perhaps.
Mm-hmm.
And our final event for this era takes place in year 109.
And that is a settled world is bombed to ruin in a retaliatory strike. The immense loss of life is seen as a turning point in public support for the various faction war machines. Certainly the beginning of the end of this era of war.
Absolutely. Very reasonable. And I believe that's the last event for this era.
Yes.
Great. So we have the era of peace here left to complete. How many events do we have for it?
We have 2 to place on this.
Great. So we'll be placing one in year 74.
Which is a trade dispute that threatens to escalate into outright war.
All right. Interesting.
Yeah. So the peace was threatened relatively recently, although nothing sparked off of it. So I'm sure the participants are remembering their grudges as this faction turn begins.
It'll be interesting to see what side of that event our current factions find themselves on. And our final event for this era is in year 17. So quite a while ago.
A group claims to have found record of the location of Earth, but it's a major scam, and a lot of people get very angry over it.
Interesting. As we currently know from our sector truths, we don't have definitive proof as to where Earth is, but maybe it's out there somewhere. Maybe it's not. I wonder if any of our current factions were involved with this, the scam, and how it could impact future relations. Cool, that takes care of outlining then our timeline, I believe, at least in the sense of giving dates and Earth years. As we mentioned earlier, we're still interested in factions with however they count time for their own planet or system or faction or whatever it may be, and choosing to format these events in that way. So with that said, do you want to go over how factions can get their faction-specific events, much like we started off the stream for this portion of the stream with Concord's event, onto this timeline, Deeds?
Yeah. So kind of going forward, the timeline will be a mutable document. On the wiki, it'll be protected so that it's restricted to mod access, but factions will be able to submit through their reps up to 5 events that they could add to the timeline. Of course, their individual faction histories could be significantly longer, but this is kind of a way that we can use the timeline as a hub, kind of leading out to various faction pieces of lore. We can get information about when each of the factions were created, and major points in their history. And then, in addition to this, right now we're also going to proceed with there being no limit on if 2 or more factions come to us with a collab, kind of to put an event that describes an interaction between 2 or more factions on the timeline. We'll happily work with them to kind of get that on there, and we're not intending not to limit that currently, but if we end up with a situation where a small group of factions is adding on a large number of events, we'll probably put a check on that.
Absolutely. So the document will show up in on a wiki article here in the next couple of hours. It could be up to 24 hours before we get that finalized and published, and we'll make sure that that is shared on the Discord server. And that way you'll be able to take a look at these, and we'll work as a community to be able to develop up the lore about some of these events. And you're welcome to take advantage of the different generic topic channels in Beacon Space to start working on something. If you do, please let sure you let a mod know so that we're able to get those documents pinged or penned, and keep track of them so that anybody who wants to help write some lore about these different events is able to participate in that process. I think we've got some interesting news coming up in 2 weeks. So as I mentioned earlier, our first faction turn stream, where we'll actually be executing orders from factions, takes place in 2 weeks. More than likely on the 3rd of, what will the next month be? 3rd of October? Yes, 3rd of October. Wow, thinking is hard. And that'll happen at the same time as this stream started at 1 p.m. Eastern. But that weekend, from the 2nd to the 4th, we're going to be holding a event for the sector of Beacon Space on the Discord server, in the style of a silent auction supporting the Children of Gome orphanage, I believe. Do you have any thoughts about that you want to expand upon, Deeds?
The charity endowment. No, I think you've captured the heart of it. Kind of the sector elite, quote unquote, coming together to definitely help out a charity and not personally profit over the social credit that one can get by helping them.
Absolutely. And we are hoping that all factions will provide to the mod team before the event an item relevant to their faction to be put up on the auction block to be bid on by members attending the event. So it'll be interesting to see what these different items are that your factions come up with. And we're hoping that we get some really fun submissions. The exciting reward is that whichever faction's item gets the most bids from players outside of their own faction will receive a mechanical reward of 1 faction credit. It'll be processed after the turn, so you'll receive it post turn 1, but that'll be a reward for making sure that whichever faction manages to get the piece of artwork that is supported the most. Or sorry, yeah, their item bid on the most.
The Children of Gome, thank you for your kind donations.
Absolutely. I believe that takes care of everything that was on our list for today. Cal, Deeds, does that make sense to both of you?
Makes sense to me.
I think we're all good.
Cool. Well, I thank everyone for attending the very first broadcast of the Beacon Association of Communication and News. I hope you enjoyed our initial stream here talking about the world of Beacon Space and introducing you to the different factions. We are going to be planning to do this monthly, so as factions get ready to take care of their faction turn 1 orders, be sure to put some thought into what you would want to present lore-wise next month, as well, as we'll be putting on another one of these. Then it'll be great to see you all, and thank you for joining us. And I'll leave you with some fun music as we sign off here. Thanks very much. Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.